Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Sales Enablement Live. My name is Felix Krüger. I'm the founder and CEO of Krüger Marketing, a service provider in the sales enablement space. So we work with small sales enablement teams all around the world to support them to make better strategic decisions and get more done when it comes to implementing initiatives. Today, we talk about a topic that I'm really passionate about, which is buyer content personalization. But before we dive in, I really want to make a shout out to everybody who's been having conversations with me after last week's episode about strategic sales tech sourcing, and a lot of great feedback, like a lot of great insights that I've gathered in those follow-up conversations. So thank you so much for reaching out. It's really added to my perspective and really proven to me that strategic sales enablement and strategic sales tech sourcing is still such a big issue for a lot of organizations. So everybody who's provided feedback, thank you so much. And now I want to start talking about today's episode and today's topic, which is the strategic personalization of buyer content. And for those of you who haven't joined one of those streams yet, please make sure to drop your comments in the chat. No matter where you're watching the stream, so we're live on YouTube, Facebook, LinkedIn, and Twitter. So just feel free to share your questions, and I will attempt to answer them towards the end of this presentation. So yeah. So without further ado, let's dive right in. So strategic buyer content personalization. And in this presentation today, I really want to share with you why personalization really matters these days, and how you can really tackle the challenge of personalization at scale for your organization. Now, the before we dive into the nitty gritty, I just want to make sure that we are on the same page when we talk about buyer content. And buyer content, to avoid any confusion, is really any content that supports buyers in making the best purchase decision possible for their organization as fast as possible. And when we think about content, a lot of people only think about articles or videos, but that could really be anything that is delivered by the sales team. So that could be conversations, phone scripts, emails, and then things like market research, case studies, microsites, buying guides, and so on. So there's a whole lot of content that can be personalized and that is buyer facing, that supports buyers in making the best decision possible. Now, when we consider why content is becoming more and more relevant in the buying process and in the decision-making process, it's really worthwhile to consider some of the research data that Gartner has previously released, that states that only 17% of time spent during the buying process is spent meeting with potential suppliers. And that's a really small percentage if you think about it. And it really should be cause for a lot of organizations to shift their mindset about what it really takes to engage buyers throughout the buyer journey, and the kind of channels that are being used to engage buyers and really add value throughout the buying process. The rest of the time that buyers spend is researching independently online, researching independently offline, and meeting with the buying group. So those are all occasions where content that you can provide can still offer value to buyers without you actually being present in real time, and or sellers being present in real time. And this is really one of the reasons, or one of the major mind shifts that I experience when working with clients, that really causes them to reevaluate the way content is being shared with their target market. Now, okay, it makes sense to produce content for buyers to help them to make better decisions, but why is personalization so important? And McKinsey has recently released a study that that really established that non-personalized communications is not only desirable, but personalized communication is not only desirable, but non-personalized communication really poses a business risk in low loyalty environments. And this is the kind of environment that we're facing right now, where brand preferences and relationships play a more play less of a role, and loyalty is really up for grabs. And from a consumer perspective, 75% of consumers tried a new shopping behavior during the pandemic. 71% of consumers expect personalization, and 76% of consumers get frustrated when they don't get it. Yeah. Now, if we delve deeper into this survey data, we can see that there's a whole lot of different aspects of personalization that I expect from consumers now. So consumers expect to make it easier for them to navigate in store and online. Uh, uh, Consumers expect to receive relevant product and services recommendations, tailored messages to their needs, offering of targeted promotions, celebration of milestones, and so on. So the list goes on, right? Now, this is all from a consumer perspective. So why am I mentioning that in the context of sales enablement and B2B buying and selling? The reason is quite simple, because this research piece here by Salesforce really establishes that business buyers these days have even higher expectations than consumers, right? Now, if we think about this research piece from McKinsey, it really shows that the expectations are really sky high to begin with. Now, if you imagine a business buyer who can draw from the consumer experience as a consumer, and also as the experience as a buyer, you can expect you suddenly realize how sky high the business buyer expectations are in terms of personalization, and it's really worthwhile pursuing that and taking consumer trends as an indicator for the kind of personalization that is required from a business buyer perspective. Now, in terms of the kinds of personalizations that B2B sellers can practice in their content, there's a whole lot. So common areas that we're looking at is, of course, the kind of roles that you're targeting. So personalization depending on who you're targeting with your in the buying team. So a CEO would have different content requirements and different personalization requirements than a CTO. Industries, of course, play a role on the highest level, whether you target a B2B business or a B2C business, for example, the manufacturing space would be very different to the high-tech space. Company size plays a really crucial role. Knowledge levels on the buying side, the kind of channel preferences where buyers want to consume content, so whether they utilize social media, whether they utilize email, or whether they just want to have one place where they can find all the information that they need. Location, of course, is a really big topic, especially here in Australia, where we deal with the APAC market that is highly fragmented and has a lot of requirements for personalization when it comes to language, when it comes to business culture, and so on. And then, of course, the buying stage, where the buyer is within their buying journey, and what sort of information is required at the respective stage that they're at. In terms of the categories of customization, we're kind of looking at two key categories. Number one is the curation of content, which is essentially the assembly of content depending on the requirements of the buyer. So this is the easiest way to personalize. The salesperson plays a real crucial role here in actually assembling the content according to the buyer needs. And customization of content, which means that specific content formats are customized towards the buyer needs. And we'll talk about both of those ways to personalize in more details in a second, but I just want to touch on them briefly to set the scene for you guys. Now, if we know what to personalize for and how to personalize, how come we don't live in a utopian economy where purchase decisions are being made seamlessly because all the content is irrelevant and responds to all their information needs, and buyers feel so well educated that they make decisions in no time? Well, the reason is that most of the time the problem is the seller organization, and there's a few things that are typically missing in order to personalize effectively. Uh, the number one reason that I come across is missing buyer and business acumen. So sellers don't really understand the buyers, their roles, and the sort of business challenges that they're dealing with, which obviously stops them from personalizing content accordingly. Industry knowledge is missing, so sellers don't understand what sort of challenges the respective industries that they're dealing with are currently facing, what sort of industry trends are impacting those, and how that relates to the solutions that they're selling. A strategic alignment internally is often missing, so sales is not aligned with marketing, especially a problem if marketing is producing content. So there's a misalignment there. And budget is often at times a problem if organizations have only very limited in-house production capabilities when it comes to content. So there's only infinite runway for organizations on that front to actually personalize content. And then time is, of course, also a constraint, especially if the roles and the functions within the business that are contributing to personalizing content are really stretched for time and are really under pressure to deliver on other things. That is really a showstopper for a lot of organizations on that front. Now, when it comes to the degrees of personalization, I I typically look at the content degree of buyer content personalization versus the buyer journey progression. And what we typically look at is that there's a very low level of personalization happening early in the buyer journey progression. And the further you progress towards the end of the buyer journey, meaning that people actually making a purchase decision, using the product, renewing, and so on. That's where you really have a higher degree of personalization because they get more of a personal interaction with sellers and with customer success, which then allows for greater insight from a seller perspective and for a greater degree of insight that then leads to the ability to personalize content. Yeah. And in the beginning of the buyer journey, oftentimes the problem that sellers face is that they have to communicate with a target market at scale, which then leads to a limited amount of personalization. And also therefore a limited amount of relevance and impact to their target markets. Yeah. Now the magic really happens for organizations that are able to find a way to personalize their content earlier in the buyer journey, which leads to greater relevance and impact early on, and also provides a competitive advantage compared to other players in their target market or in their market, which might only follow the standard approach of personalizing later in the buyer journey. Now, the question is how we get there and how we get to that personalization early on in the buyer journey. And the very first step that you should always follow is to specify the goals. Yeah, so specify the go-to-market goals for the sales organization. And some examples are the penetration of a new industry segment, the launch into a new territory. It might be a location within your existing target country, or it might be new countries that you're targeting, increase product revenue share within your entire product portfolio. So you want to increase the revenue share of a certain product that has more of a strategic value to the organization, or to upsell, cross-sell. So personalization can never be a goal in itself. Personalization always has to contribute to the overarching goal of the sales organization. So therefore, it is really crucial to specify the goals that you're targeting before you start your personalization journey. Now, the next step in the process would be to reestablish or revisit or to validate buyer personas. And I would always recommend doing so by talking directly to your target market and leading interviews for those organizations that are well resourced and do this on a regular basis. I'm preaching to the choir here. It's nothing you wouldn't do anyway, but generally speaking, I would always recommend revisiting buyer personas if you approach a major strategic project or a smaller strategic project such as buyer content personalization. Now, as part of this buyer persona analysis, I would always recommend looking at the kind of roles that they're dealing with internally, what their collaborators are, what their priorities are, and so on, which really helps you to nail down the kind of personalization that you need to undertake to make the content that you present to them more relevant. The next step then in the process is, and again, anybody who follows my content on a more regular basis knows that I keep on banging on about this topic, and this is something that I believe is really crucial and underutilized for a lot of organizations, and that is the mapping of the buyer journey. Yeah, mapping of the buyer journey is really crucial in order to be customer-centric and to really make the life of your customers easy in your sales enablement activity. So you map the buyer journey, then overlay your sales process, which specifies how your sales organization feeds into the buyer journey and makes their life easier. And then you also map the content accordingly. So what sort of content is required, can be delivered through your sales organization to support the buyer journey and make the life of the roles involved at the different stages easier. And once you have created clarity around those things, suddenly you paint a picture that makes it much, much easier to understand where you fall short, where you hit the mark to a certain degree, and where you are already doing really well. And this is often a revelation, because a lot of organizations have an intuition on where they're doing not so well, but actually putting it on paper and really mapping out the buyer journeys can really create clarity around those areas, and specifically in the content area. And we typically utilize a rather large spreadsheet in those kind of projects with clients that helps us to actually map all those variables, the different touch points of different buyer personas throughout the buyer journey, and the content accordingly. But no matter how sophisticated and how much detail you actually apply throughout this exercise, the journey, the sales process, and the content, and they're the kind of three things that you should map in each case to actually create clarity around your gaps. Now that you've actually created clarity and identified where you're missing content and where it makes sense to personalize, it actually goes into the nitty-gritty of the tactical execution. And one of the ways to personalize content I want to explain first, which is modular content. And modular content is the harder type of content to personalize, because it is a combination of standardized content and personalized content. And if we take the example of a sales presentation, what you could, for example, be looking at is a presentation that has certain slides that are standardized, and then certain slides that can be swapped depending on what sort of buyer you're targeting and what sort of industry segment you're targeting. Yeah. And an example could be that the challenge outlines that describes your target market's challenge is the same across all of the organizations that you target. And then the impact statement that specifies what sort of problem specifically your company is able to solve and what sort of KPIs are impacted. That might differ depending on the specific segment that you're talking to. And you might be able to actually have different slides that states that impact in different ways. And a presentation, for example, might contain those personalized slides, and that can be swapped out by the sales team depending on who they're talking to. Another popular example of personalization in the slide deck example would be use cases or case studies. Depending on who specifically your buyer is, what sort of organization you target, you might include slides that speak to different kinds of buyers in different ways and can be swapped out depending on who you're talking to. Now, a slide deck is a low-hanging fruit when it comes to examples of personalization, often, obviously, because slide decks are a very popular content format in the sales context. But that can really apply to any sort of content that your sales team uses. So, for example, if you think about infographics, infographics that have different modules, can be personalized accordingly. So your marketing team might create 5 different versions of the infographic depending on the target market that you're speaking to, with different modules that are more relevant to specific segments. These can be phone scripts, which are tailored depending on the kind of target market that you're speaking to. It can be videos that have different introductions depending on who you're speaking to, and so on. So modular content, or content, can be modular really across any sort of content format that you can think of in the sales context. And that really comes down to the kind of buyer content examples I mentioned initially. So there's a huge range of content formats that can be modular, that can be personalized. The next way to personalize content is curated content. Yeah, and content curation becomes more and more important these days when you think about the overload of messaging that is going on. If you think about, for example, email as still one of the most popular ways to interact with buyers, and you think about all the emails that are going back and forth with buyers, with potential information, and also the distraction through other emails that a buyer might receive, email becomes really a less and less interesting and less and less relevant channel in the buyer interaction. And content curation and really collecting content that is tailored towards the buyer needs becomes a really popular way to reduce friction on that front. So what that means is suddenly the buyer has all the content that they need in one place in a personalized manner. And the fact that content is assembled towards the buyer needs and customized accordingly is personalization in itself. So you might have a number of generic assets, but by the fact that you collect these assets and assemble these assets specific to your target buyer needs, you already take a lot of friction out of the process of educating the buyer and making the content more relevant. Now, you can then take it to the next level by integrating modular content in that curated content. So, for example, if you have case studies, if you have demo recordings and so on, if you create modular versions of those and really tailor to the individual buyer's needs, you can then take the content curation to the next level. Now, the next step, once you've actually personalized the content, is to increase the ease of use for the sales team. And there's kind of 2 key components to that. Number one is the sales briefing. So it's actually educating the sales team on what sort of content formats are available, what sort of personalization is being conducted or can be conducted within those content formats. For example, if it's modular content, or how you recommend content being curated for certain target industry segments. So those kind of briefing sessions are best done in real time. So I would never recommend actually doing those briefing sessions through emails. Those are best done in meetings, so you can clarify any questions with the sales team. And then the second part is to that is actually the storage of those content formats. Yeah, and there's different levels of sophistication which offer different levels of friction for the sales team. So at the bottom end of the spectrum, you just have simply folders, which is something that I still come across in some cases. So that means content is being shared through emails with some sort of content producer. So, for example, product marketing or marketing sends out an email and says, "Hey guys, here's the new slide deck for your target buyers," and those content assets are then stored on the respective sales reps folder or in their email inbox. And this is really the lowest level of sophistication. Then the next level would be shared drives, which allows for better management of assets, centralized management by whoever produces the content or manages the content. Shared drives with the taxonomy and tags, which make it easier for sales people to search for content and find content, is the next level of sophistication. Then the next level up, that's a bit more specialized and requires specific tools. So a sales CMS is becoming more and more common. So there's more niche providers like Enablix, for example, or more mainstream providers like Seismic or HighSpot or Showpad, which allow for the management of dedicated sales content assets. Those CMSs are more sophisticated just simply because their search functionality is more sophisticated. It's easier for sales enablement teams to actually package content upfront for sales teams and structure content in a certain way that makes it easier for sales to use it. And then the ultimate way to really structure content and make it really easily accessible for sales is the combination of a sales CMS and a CRM integration. The reason why that is the most sophisticated way is because sales would typically look to reduce the amount of separate systems and tools that they use throughout the sales process. And considering that they're most likely to already use a CRM integration is really powerful in a way that you can have standardized or you can have customized, a recommendation on what sort of content to use for specific clients' opportunities. The CMS would feed those recommendations straight into the CRM. In some cases, you're able to search CMS content straight in the CRM and so on. So this really offers the greatest level of sophistication when it comes to reducing the friction and increasing the ease of use for sales. Now, then once you've actually planned, produced, and shared the content with sales, they go out, use it in market, share it through whatever means necessary. You then obviously want to see how it actually resonated, so you can optimize the content and be more and more strategic in personalizing that content. There's different measures you can use. I would always recommend measuring the overall sales effectiveness, even though whatever metrics you use to measure sales effectiveness would always be a blended metric of all the sales enablement efforts that you implement. So there might be a number of different initiatives that you implement, and content personalization might be one part of it. But because that is the North Star, it is always worthwhile looking at that. And the next metrics I would be looking at is the CMS engagement data. So if you have a CMS, it's really worthwhile to actually look at what sort of content pieces generate the greatest engagement from a buyer perspective. So if you have any measurement capabilities, that is worth looking at to actually analyze if you have different sort of assets that speak to the same buyer at similar buying stages, what resonates most. And then win-loss analysis. I can only re-emphasize that over and over again. You have to talk to the buyer, and you have to get those qualitative insights from your buyers to really assess not only your sales process and sales impact, but also the degree of content impact and the sort of personalization efforts and how they resonated with the buyers. And I think part of any win-loss analysis should always be the question around content. What sort of content did you find most useful in the way you made your buying decision? What was missing in the content? What resonated most? Did you have all the content available to effectively share certain information within different roles within your organization and so on? And those kind of qualitative insights will be really valuable for you to assess the impact your personalization efforts have had. And then on top of that, I would also always receive seller feedback. But seller feedback, I think, should be the lowest priority, just simply because it really provides an isolated view on content effectiveness and doesn't provide any sort of independent insight into how it actually resonated with buyers. Of course, sellers will get some indicative feedback from buyers at times and anecdotal feedback if they share the content in real time, or they might receive feedback via email where a buyer requests additional information that is not there, or buyer provides feedback that certain information was very useful. So that can provide some insight, but I would always use that sort of insight as complementary to the others that I just mentioned. Now, this is really the whole journey of how to tackle strategic personalization of content. And just to recap the different stages, you start out by specifying go-to-market goals. You then review and validate buyer personas. You map the buyer journey and sales process, which would then allow you to map the buyer content. You identify personalization gaps in your content. You specify the personalization approach, whether it's modular or curated, and apply that to the different content pieces. You improve the ease of use by briefing your sales team and storing content in a centralized location. And then you measure and optimize on a regular basis to ensure that you really achieve the impact that you want to achieve. This is really the whole journey. But before I let you go, I really want to share a case study that really brings that whole concept of content personalization to life, and really shows, based on a real world example, what sort of impact content personalization can really have. And the example that I want to share here is from a company that was launching a new product category at scale. And this company, no matter if you what sort of product you launch, if it's a new product category and a new category that the market is not familiar with, this always offers a great opportunity, of course, because you're likely to be a first mover in your market. But it also offers a great challenge because the market is not very educated in that area, and they really have a great desire to actually, or they have a really great need to actually understand the product benefits, because they haven't learned anything about it yet. Yeah. And in this particular example, the market education was really not scalable in the SMB segment. When it came to enterprise accounts, that was really straightforward because there was a limited number of accounts that could be targeted with sales content, and content could be personalized. But in the SMB segment, it really became too fragmented. But at the same time, there was a great opportunity from a revenue perspective to actually gain traction in the SMB segment. And this particular company did not want to miss out on that opportunity as well. So the solution to this challenge was to, in the enterprise space, to conduct a in-person roadshow, as you would typically do with a new product launch. So in this roadshow, what we did was we integrated personalization modules. So we really had a opportunity to really easily personalize those presentations depending on the kind of organization we were presenting to and the kind of roles that were present. And in the SMB space, what we did was we recorded on-demand webinars, different versions of a webinar, again modular, which was paired with then follow-up Q&A calls, which allowed us to reach more buyers in a more personalized way at scale. So a whole lot of buyers were able to actually consume those webinars, and then we were able to have really structured Q&A calls and cover a whole lot of ground by having the respective product specialists on the call to really answer their questions and also drive the education forward. On top of that, for both segments, what we also did was we curated content depending on the needs of the SMB market segment or the individual enterprise accounts, which also contributed to the respective buyers to have greater insights or greater education levels really quickly. On top of that, we also produced content. There was sales tools to support consultative selling. So especially because the product category was new, there is generally in those kind of scenarios very little room for a transactional selling attitude. You really need to be consultative, and those kind of tools that we created, which were mainly infographics and calculators, really made it easy for sales to through the infographics showcase how the solution fits into the customer's business, really visualize that in a really easy to understand way. Really made it easier for the customer and the salesperson to narrow down which part of the solution can impact what sort of part of the business and where to focus the conversation. And then calculators made it really easy to assess the costs and the estimated impact that the solution was able to generate in that respective area. So the combination of those different tools was really the reason for the impact that we were able to generate. And this particular product launch in this new category generated $2 million within the first 12 months. So that was really great traction for that business. So that was far beyond the expectations. And on top of that, when we created win-loss analysis, as mentioned earlier, as one of the measurement mechanisms, content relevance was identified as one of the key contributors to each of purchase for those businesses that ended up buying. And there was really a great proof for the effort that was put into personalization, and really showed that it is not only desirable to generally make life easier for the buyer, but it really offers commercial benefit, and it is proven through qualitative insights that really made a difference for buyers throughout their journey. Well, that was it for today for strategic content personalization. I hope you found it useful. As always, if you want to continue the conversation, and this is really something that I thrive on, so please don't hesitate to reach out to me. I'm most active on LinkedIn. Look me up at Felix Krüger. If you want to email me with follow-up questions, please also feel free to email me at felix@krugermarketing.com. What I'm also looking for is always input into the desire for future sessions and topics that we want to cover in future sessions. So please make sure to share any sales enablement related topics that you're interested in. We really want to do more of these deep dives also in the new year. We also want to integrate subject matter experts from outside the business. So if you're interested in hearing about specific topics, please let me know. As always, thank you so much for listening, and I'll speak to you soon.